At my grandfather's funeral, while the priest spoke about legacy and love, my family was already counting zeros. The marble chapel gleamed like money gold-trimmed caskets, imported lilies and mourners who pretended to care. I sat in the second row, hands folded in my lap, watching my mother dab her eyes with a lace handkerchief that hadn't touched a single tear. My father, Richard, checked his Rolex every few minutes as if the service was taking time away from more important business. My brother Marcus whispered jokes to his wife, and even from 2 rows back, I could hear the faint chime of someone's champagne bracelet. That's how they grieved, by showing off. When the service ended, the lawyer stood at the front of the chapel and cleared his throat. "If the family will follow me," he said. "Mr. Harrison requested that the reading of his will take place today." The words cut through the murmurs like a bell. My heart tightened. Grandpa had been a man of precision and purpose. If he wanted the will read today, it meant something. I followed my family into the mahogany-paneled office next door, the same one where I'd spent summers as a child sketching in the corner while Grandpa discussed shipping contracts and business deals. The lawyer, Mr. Hanley, adjusted his glasses and opened a thick folder. "To my son Richard Harrison, I leave Harrison Aviation, its subsidiaries, and all associated assets." Dad smiled broadly. The company was worth at least $50 million. "To my daughter-in-law Veronica Harrison," Hanley continued, "I bequeath the Napa Valley estate, including all furnishings, artwork, and its vineyard." My mother gasped softly, her eyes shining. "Oh, Harold," she whispered dramatically, clutching her pearls. "You always did have taste." The laughter around the room was subtle, polite, smug. "To my grandson Marcus Harrison, I leave my collection of vintage automobiles and the penthouse on Fifth Avenue." Marcus smirked, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "Guess I'll need to learn how to drive a Rolls," he muttered. Even the lawyer smiled. "To my granddaughter Grace Harrison," the room went silent. Every eye turned toward me. My pulse hammered in my ears. I sat up straighter. Grandpa and I had been close once. He'd taught me chess, taken me fishing, told me stories about loyalty and integrity. Maybe he'd left me something meaningful. "I leave..." Mr. Hanley hesitated, glancing down at the final page. "This." He held up a single yellowed envelope. "A deed to the cabin in Evergreen Woods." For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Marcus laughed, a sharp sound that cut through the air. "A cabin? You mean that old shack with the roof caved in?" Mom's lips curled into a pitying smile. "Well, honey, maybe your grandfather thought you'd enjoy a little peace and quiet. It's good for reflection." Even the lawyer looked uncomfortable. "That concludes the reading," he said quickly. I sat frozen in my chair, the envelope heavy in my trembling hands. Around me, laughter swelled, subdued at first, then open, unrestrained. My cousin Emma whispered to her husband, "She got a shack while we got the mansion." Her voice dripped with amusement. Marcus leaned across the table. "Maybe there's a raccoon living there. Congratulations, sis, you inherited wildlife." My father's tone was cooler, sharper. "Grace, I'm sure your grandfather had his reasons. But you shouldn't get your hopes up. That place hasn't been livable in 20 years. Their words blurred together, a chorus of condescension and mock sympathy. I forced a small smile. "Thank you," I said softly. "Grandpa always wanted me to have something of my own." Mom chuckled behind her tissue. "Well, he certainly gave you that. Enjoy your independence." The laughter followed me out of the office, echoing down the marble hallway. I walked past portraits of ancestors, men in suits, women in pearls, all staring down as if amused by the same cruel joke. My heels clicked on the floor like a metronome for humiliation. Outside, the afternoon sun was too bright. I stepped onto the church steps, clutching the envelope to my chest. My brother's voice floated out behind me. "Hey, sis, maybe the cabin's haunted. At least you'll have company." More laughter. The heavy oak doors shut, muting them at last. I stood alone in the quiet. For a long moment I couldn't move. Then I opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, browned at the edges, a property deed signed and dated in my grandfather's handwriting. The ink had faded, but one line was clear. Evergreen Woods Cabin Parcel, Hashon 47 Woe, to Grace Harrison, my legacy of truth. Legacy of truth. The phrase made my skin prickle. Grandpa had always loved his riddles. He used to tell me, Grace, truth isn't always gold and marble. Sometimes it's hidden under dust and silence. A gust of wind rustled the paper and I clutched it tightly. In the parking lot below, my family climbed into their luxury cars, black sedans, gleaming SUVs. Engines roared to life, tires crunching over gravel. I watched them drive away one by one, their laughter fading into the distance. When the last car disappeared, I looked back at the church. For a heartbeat, I thought I saw Grandpa's reflection in the glass door, smiling, faint but unmistakable. It vanished when I blinked. I folded the deed carefully and slipped it into my purse. My pulse steadied. The humiliation still burned, but beneath it something colder took root, a sense of purpose. I walked to my old sedan, the one everyone joked belonged in a scrapyard, and sat behind the wheel. My hands trembled as I started the engine. The paper on the passenger seat caught the light, the words Evergreen Woods Cabin glowing faintly in the sunday. I thought about the summers I'd spent at Grandpa's house, how he'd sit with me on the porch and whisper stories about the cabin, how it was once the heart of something important, a place that kept secrets. I'd always thought he was being poetic. Maybe he wasn't. In the rearview mirror, I could see my reflection, pale, tired, but unbroken. I pressed my lips together, whispering to myself, "You wanted me invisible, Grandpa, but maybe you were teaching me how to disappear before I reappear." The road stretched ahead, leading out of the city toward Evergreen Woods. My family had laughed, called it worthless, called me foolish for accepting it without protest. But as the city skyline faded behind me, I felt the weight of their laughter lifting, replaced by something else. Hope, curiosity, and a flicker of defiance. Maybe the cabin was broken. Maybe it was just rotting timber and dust. But Grandpa never did anything without a reason. And if this was his final gift, there had to be more to it than decay. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, wind tugging at my hair through the open window. "All right, Grandpa," I murmured. "Let's see what you left me." The road narrowed, winding through the hills, trees closing in on either side. The sunlight dimmed, replaced by the cool shade of the forest. Somewhere in the distance, a woodpecker knocked like a heartbeat against the silence. The cabin waited. They laughed when I accepted it. I smiled because I knew something they didn't. That broken cabin wasn't the end of my inheritance. It was the beginning of his final will. The road narrowed until it was barely more than a trail through a forest of towering pines. My GPS had stopped working 20 minutes earlier, and the radio hissed with static. The afternoon light dimmed as clouds gathered, turning the world into shades of silver and green. When the trees finally broke, I saw the cabin from the deed. It stood in a small clearing surrounded by wild grass and moss. The porch was half collapsed, one shutter hung crookedly from a single hinge, and ivy crawled up the chimney like it was trying to reclaim the building. My grandfather's words echoed in my head. Truth isn't always gold and marble. Sometimes it's hidden under dust and silence. I parked the car and stepped out. The air smelled of pine needles and rain. When I opened the creaking door, a gust of musty air hit me. Dust motes floated in the slanted light like tiny ghosts. The floor groaned under my boots. Inside, there were only a few broken chairs, a table with one leg missing, and cobwebs thick enough to look like curtains. I walked through the narrow hallway, brushing against peeling wallpaper. A photograph hung crooked on the wall. My grandfather, decades younger, standing proudly in front of the same cabin with a group of men in work clothes. The sign above them read Harrison Timber Company, 1972. I touched the frame gently. The handwriting on the back said, "Where it all began." So this wasn't just a random cabin. It was the birthplace of the family business that had made the Harrisons rich. Everyone else had inherited the company, the estates, the mansions. And me, I got the place where it all started, where it had been built by calloused hands and honest labor. Outside, the crunch of boots on gravel made me turn. An elderly man approached, leaning on a walking stick. His face was weathered, his expression kind but cautious. "Miss Harrison?" he asked. "Yes, I'm Bennett. Used to be caretaker around here back when your granddad still came up every month." I smiled slightly. "I didn't think anyone came here anymore. Not for years," he said. "Most folks in town forgot this place existed. Harold never did." "You knew him well," Bennett nodded. "As well as anyone could know a man like him. He said this cabin was his conscience. Funny thing, isn't it? Richest man in the county? But this old shack was where he came to feel grounded." I looked around the clearing. My family said he was losing his mind at the end. Bennett's eyes narrowed. He was sharper than all of them put together. Just stopped playing their games. "Be careful, Miss Harrison. People remember things differently when there's money involved." The warning lingered long after he disappeared down the trail. As evening fell, I sat by the broken window and reread the deed. On the back, faint handwriting caught the light key beneath the hearth. "Truth inside the roots." I grabbed a flashlight and knelt by the fireplace. The stones were cracked, the mortar crumbling. I reached under the hearth, and my fingers brushed something wrapped in cloth. I pulled it out, a small rusted key tied with a red ribbon. My heart pounded. The key didn't match the front door or any cabinet. I tapped along the floorboards near the fireplace until I heard a hollow sound. I pried up one plank and found a metal box nailed shut, its lock ancient but intact. The key was too small. I sighed, frustrated, but tucked it into my pocket anyway. On a dusty bookshelf, I noticed a row of old encyclopedias. One was slightly pushed forward. I pulled it out and something fell from behind a leather-bound journal. The first page read, "If you're reading this, I trust you found the cabin." My breath caught. I turned the page. The entries began like a business log, notes about lumber shipments, meeting schedules, and expansion plans. Then the tone changed. The handwriting grew hurried, angry. Richard altered the board vote. I confronted him. He denied it, of course. But I know. The company's soul is being sold piece by piece. I froze. "Richard, my father." Another line followed. "If he won't protect what I built, I will. The cabin will hold what they can't destroy." My fingers trembled. My grandfather had known his son was betraying him. He had hidden something here, something important enough to build an entire secret room around. A flash of lightning illuminated the window. The rain started suddenly pelting the roof in waves. I kept reading. The last entry was dated just months before his death. "Grace is the only one who listens. She understands value beyond money. One day she'll need this place more than they know." My eyes burned. For the first time since the will reading, the ache of humiliation gave way to something else, grief mixed with awe. He had trusted me even when I didn't understand why. The phone buzzed in my pocket, startling me. Mom's name glowed on the screen. I hesitated before answering. "Sweetheart," she said, her tone syrupy. "Your brother posted a funny picture of that cabin. Everyone's having a laugh. Don't take it personally." I kept silent. "Anyway, we've been thinking you shouldn't stay there. It's dangerous. Come home and we'll help you sell the property." "You mean you'll buy it back for pennies?" I said flatly. "Grace, don't be dramatic. You know your grandfather wasn't himself toward the end." "Maybe you're wrong about that." Her voice hardened. "I'm trying to protect you. You don't know what you're dealing with." "I think I'm starting to," I whispered and hung up. The storm raged outside, thunder rolling through the hills. I lit 2 candles and sat on the floor with the journal open beside me. Shadows danced on the walls and the cabin creaked like it was breathing. A branch snapped outside. I froze, heart hammering. The sound came again, footsteps crunching on wet leaves. I grabbed my flashlight, walked to the door and threw it open. Nothing but rain and darkness. The wind carried a faint metallic echo like someone closing a car door in the distance. I waited a long moment before stepping back inside. The fire had gone out, leaving the cabin in darkness, except for the flickering candles. I slipped the journal and the key under my pillow before lying down on the couch. Sleep came fitfully, full of half-formed dreams of my grandfather whispering through static. When morning light filtered through the broken windows, the rain had stopped. Steam rose from the forest floor. I brewed instant coffee over a camping stove and glanced around. Something about the fireplace caught my eye. Tiny carvings on the floorboards near the hearth, almost invisible under years of grime. I knelt down and wiped away the dust. There it was again, my grandfather's initials, HH carved beside a familiar symbol, his favorite chess piece, the knight. "You left me a game, didn't you?" I murmured. The sunlight touched the carvings like a quiet answer. Outside, the forest was still, yet for the first time I didn't feel alone. Somewhere in the silence, I could almost hear my grandfather's voice saying, "You'll find it when you stop looking for gold and start looking for truth." I stepped onto the porch and took in the view, the mist curling between trees, the endless stretch of green. The cabin was falling apart, but beneath the decay, I felt its purpose beating like a hidden heart. They all laughed when I accepted this place, when I walked out of the lawyer's office with an old envelope instead of millions. But as I stood there watching sunlight break through the fog, I understood why Grandpa had chosen me. This cabin wasn't a punishment, it was an invitation. Somewhere inside its walls was the truth that could change everything. And I was finally ready to find it. By the time I woke up, sunlight was spilling through the cracks in the wooden walls. The storm had passed, leaving behind the soft smell of wet pine and earth. For a moment, everything felt still until I opened my phone. The notifications were endless. My brother Marcus had posted a photo of me holding the cabin deed at the lawyer's office, captioned, "Some people just aren't meant for the big leagues." Dozens of laughing emojis followed. My cousin Emma commented, "Guess cabins are cozy, if you like rats." Others joined in, people I hadn't spoken to in years. Someone had even tagged a local newspaper, the Harrison heiress who got a shack. I sat on the edge of the couch staring at the screen. My throat burned. Every click of laughter felt like a match against my skin. They weren't content to humiliate me in private, they wanted the world to laugh too. The phone buzzed again. "Mom." "Sweetheart," she said, her voice thick with false concern. "You've seen the posts, haven't you? Marcus was just being playful. Don't let it upset you." "Playful?" I asked. "You know how he is always joking. Honestly, you could use a sense of humor right now." I closed my eyes. "What do you want, Mom? I want you to come home. That place isn't safe. The locals out there are unpredictable. You shouldn't be wandering around by yourself." "You mean it's not safe for the family's reputation?" I said. There was silence. Then sharper, "Grace, don't start this again. We're trying to help you." "I don't need help," I said quietly. "I need honesty." I hung up. The cabin was quiet except for the ticking of the clock above the fireplace. Outside, sunlight streamed through the trees. I packed a small bag and drove into town for supplies, tools, a broom, some cleaning rags. People stared when I walked into the general store. Whispers followed me down the aisles. "That's her, isn't it?" I heard one woman murmur. "Harold's granddaughter. The one who got the cabin." Another replied, "They say the old man left her nothing else." Poor thing. When I turned toward them, they pretended to browse the shelves. At the register, the clerk, a heavy-set man with kind eyes, gave me a long look. "You cleaning up the old place?" "Yes," I said. "Your granddad was a good man," he said softly. "Used to buy tools here every month. Said that cabin kept him honest." "Honest?" I echoed. The man smiled faintly. "He built it with his own hands. Not for money, for peace of mind." The words stayed with me as I drove back through the forest. My grandfather, the man they said was losing his mind, had built his own refuge. Maybe this place wasn't as worthless as everyone thought. By evening, I had swept the floors, scrubbed the windows, and set up a folding chair near the fireplace. As the sun dipped behind the trees, the forest glowed in amber light. Then came a knock at the door. It was Mr. Bennett. He held a lantern in one hand and a bottle of whiskey in the other. "Thought you could use company," he said. I let him in. He looked around approvingly. You've done more cleaning in a day than anyone's done in 30 years. We sat by the window as dusk settled. Mr. Bennett, I said, why did Grandpa come here so often? He took a sip of whiskey before answering. Your grandfather once told me, when you build something from nothing, you see who people really are. He came here whenever business got ugly. Said the cabin reminded him of what mattered. What did he mean by ugly? Bennett's eyes darkened. You should talk to Mr. Hanley, his lawyer. He'll tell you the parts I'm not supposed to. Why not you? Because I still live here, he said simply. And not everyone in this town has forgotten what happened between your father and Harold. Just be careful who you trust. After he left, I sat alone with his words echoing in my head. Be careful who you trust. Rain began to fall again, light and rhythmic. I took out Grandpa's journal and read the last line again. Grace will understand value beyond money. For the first time, I wondered if my family's version of events, the story of an old man who lost his mind, had been a lie all along. The next morning, as I was sweeping near the back room, the broom handle caught on a loose floorboard. The sound was hollow. I knelt and pressed on the board. It lifted slightly. Underneath was a thin compartment containing a folded piece of paper. I unfolded it carefully. It was an old business plan, Harrison Timber Consolidation 1987. But the signatures didn't match. Grandpa's name looked wrong, letters, uneven ink lighter. A forgery. My stomach clenched. I'd seen my father's signature enough times to recognize the style. He had forged his own father's name to seize control of the company. The betrayal wasn't just rumor, it was fact. Outside tires crunched on gravel. I peeked through the window and froze. A silver Porsche glimmered through the trees. Marcus. He got out wearing sunglasses and a grin. Wow, he said, looking around. This place is worse than I imagined. What are you doing here? I asked. He stepped onto the porch, glancing inside. Dad sent me. We're worried about you. Really, yeah. You've been gone for days. People are talking. Maybe it's time to stop playing hermit and sign the deed over. We can find a buyer. You'll get a decent cut. I folded my arms. You mean you'll get control of whatever Grandpa left here? Marcus shrugged. Why make this hard, Grace? You were never into business. Let us handle it, like you handled him, I said quietly. His smile faltered. Careful. I found a document, I continued, with a forged signature. Dad's. He laughed, but the sound was tight. You don't know what you're talking about. I think I do. He leaned closer, dropping his voice. Listen, you think you're uncovering some great mystery, but all you're doing is stirring up ghosts. Dad has lawyers who can prove this cabin doesn't even belong to you. Then why are you here begging for it? For a second, I saw real anger flash across his face. Then he straightened and smiled again. You've always been dramatic. Don't say I didn't warn you. When his car disappeared down the road, I exhaled shakily. My hands were trembling not from fear but from something sharper. Determination. That night I sat by the fire with Grandpa's journal open on my lap. The flames flickered across his handwriting. When they come for the ashes, let them find fire instead. I read the line aloud, feeling its weight. They think they've buried you, Grandpa, I whispered. But they haven't. Thunder rumbled in the distance. I looked around the cabin, its worn walls, its scars, its secrets, and I saw it differently now. Not as a ruin, but as a weapon disguised as weakness. I grabbed a notebook and started making notes, dates, names, connections. The forged document proved my father's deceit, but there had to be more proof strong enough to expose everything. Outside wind howled through the trees, carrying the scent of rain and pine. Inside the fire crackled softly, throwing golden light over the pages of my grandfather's journal. They thought I was the joke of the family, the forgotten granddaughter with a broken cabin. But they were wrong. This wasn't a punishment, it was a challenge, and I was done being the quiet one. By the time I blew out the candle, the rain had stopped. The forest outside was silent again, heavy with secrets. I looked around the cabin, my inheritance, my battleground, and whispered, "All right, Grandpa, let's finish what you started." In the shadows near the fireplace, the carvings of his initials caught the last flicker of light, glowing faintly like a silent promise. The first thing I noticed when I reached the cabin was the silence. It wasn't peaceful, at least not yet. It was the heavy kind, the kind that made you aware of every breath you took, every creak of wood beneath your feet. The trees stood tall around it like witnesses to something long forgotten. The structure looked even worse up close, peeling paint-broken shutters and a roof that sagged like it had given up years ago. I stood there in my city coat and leather boots, feeling ridiculous. My family had left the lawyer's office laughing at my inheritance. Marcus had joked that maybe I could rent it out for Halloween. Even Mom's pitying tone still echoed in my ears. Sweetheart, sometimes love means accepting disappointment gracefully. I had smiled then, but standing in front of this wreck, I almost laughed out loud. The door stuck when I tried to push it open, and when it finally gave way, dust billowed into my face. The air smelled of cedar and rain of time itself. My phone barely had reception, so I used the flashlight. The cabin was small, one large room with a loft above. Cobwebs framed the windows, and the furniture, though old, was sturdy. There was a stone fireplace, cold and gray now, and shelves lined with books that looked untouched for decades. I walked further and fingers grazing the mantel. Something about the place tugged at me, not nostalgia exactly, but recognition. Grandpa used to tell me stories about the cabin in the hills. I'd thought it was just another of his metaphors, a way to teach me about patience and self-reliance. But here it was. Real. Broken, yes, but real. Near the fireplace, a wooden box sat on the floor covered in dust. My pulse quickened. It wasn't locked, just heavy. Inside were papers tied with string, a few photographs, and a small brass key. The photos showed Grandpa standing by the same cabin, but it looked new then. He was younger, smiling, sleeves rolled up, a hammer in one hand. On the back of one photo, in his careful handwriting, it said, "Built with purpose, not pride." I swallowed hard. What purpose? The papers were mostly old receipts, supply lists, and property records. One document, though, stood out. It was a blueprint. The cabin drawn meticulously with a strange marking near the fireplace, a small cross. I turned toward the fireplace again. Something about the stones looked off. One near the base had a small notch, barely visible beneath years of soot. I crouched, fingers trembling slightly, and pressed it. A click. Part of the wall shifted, revealing a narrow compartment. Inside was a sealed envelope, yellowed with age. My name was written across it in Grandpa's familiar handwriting. For a moment, I just stared. Then I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a key identical to the one in the box. The letter began simply, "My dearest Grace, if you are reading this, you have already faced their laughter. Let them laugh. That's how you'll know you were chosen for something they can't see." My breath caught. The cabin is not a burden, it's a beginning. What it contains cannot be seen from the outside, and that's the point. You will find what matters only when you're ready to see beyond what money buys. Use the key. Look beneath the roots. Trust the silence, it will guide you home. Grandpa read the words again and again, as if they might rearrange themselves into something I could understand. Beneath the roots, outside winds stirred through the trees. The key felt warm in my hand. I stepped out onto the porch and scanned the yard. The grass had overgrown and wildflowers pushed through the cracks in the path. Near the back of the cabin, an old oak tree towered, its roots thick and gnarled like fingers gripping the earth. I walked toward it, the ground soft underfoot. The base of the tree looked undisturbed, except for a patch of earth that seemed smoother than the rest, as if it had been touched or dug before. I hesitated. The sun was setting, painting the forest gold. A shovel leaned against the cabin wall, rusted but sturdy. I grabbed it and began to dig. The soil came away easily at first, then harder as roots thickened beneath the surface. After a few minutes, the shovel hit something solid. I knelt and brushed away dirt. A small metal box almost the same size as a jewelry case. My hands shook as I lifted it free. The lock matched the key perfectly. The lid opened with a faint click. Inside was a velvet pouch, an old journal, and a small silver chess piece, a knight. I lifted the knight, feeling its weight. It was smooth, worn from handling. On its base, engraved in tiny letters, were the words, "The game isn't over." The journal smelled like pine and ink. The first page was dated more than 30 years ago. Grandpa's handwriting filled every line. Notes about business deals, shipments, and something called Integrity Holdings. My eyes widened as I skimmed the entries. He had been transferring shares, investments, and ownership into hidden trusts years before the will was ever written. The last entry stopped me cold. The assets are secured beneath her name. Grace must never know until she understands what value really means. The family will chase money. She must learn purpose. The night will lead her when the board resets. My heart pounded. Assets. Hidden trusts. My name. A sound broke the silence, a branch snapping behind me. I spun around, clutching the box. Nothing but trees. Still, I felt watched. The forest seemed to hold its breath. I hurried back inside, locking the door behind me. The night came fast in the hills, and the cabin grew darker by the minute. I lit one of the old oil lamps I'd found on the shelf. Its glow flickered across the walls, catching on the photographs, the dust, the life he'd left behind. I sat at the table, spreading the contents of the box before me, the letter, the night, the journal. My fingers brushed over the chess piece again. The night will lead her when the board resets. I thought back to all those years playing chess with him on Sunday afternoons. He always said the night was underestimated. It moves differently, he'd tell me. It sees angles the others don't. Maybe that's what he meant. Maybe this was the angle. I looked around the cabin again, really seeing it for the first time. It wasn't just a relic. It was a code. The photos, the structure, even the placement of things, it all meant something. I took a deep breath. The fear was gone, replaced by something steadier. Purpose. I opened the journal again, flipping to the back. Tucked between the last pages was another folded paper, a business card embossed with gold lettering. Alexander Grant, Executive Director, Integrity Holdings, New York. On the back, in Grandpa's handwriting, it read, "He knows what comes next. Show him the night." I sank back into the chair, staring at the card. New York, Integrity Holdings. The night. Outside, the wind picked up, whispering through the trees like a voice I couldn't quite hear. I pressed the chess piece against my palm, the metal cool against my skin. Whatever this was, it wasn't just about property or inheritance anymore. It was a game, and I had just made my first move. The laughter of my family still echoed somewhere in the back of my mind, but this time it didn't sting. They'd seen an old cabin. I'd seen a map. As I closed the journal and blew out the lamp, the cabin fell into darkness again. But I wasn't afraid. For the first time since the will reading, I knew where I was going. And more importantly, I knew who I was becoming. The rain had followed me all the way down the mountain. By the time I reached the small town at the base, the windshield wipers could barely keep up. The road signs were half hidden behind mist, but I didn't care. My mind wasn't in Oregon anymore. It was already in New York, chasing a name I couldn't get out of my head. Alexander Grant. The card burned in my pocket like a secret too dangerous to hold. Grandpa's handwriting had been so clear. He knows what comes next. That one sentence had changed everything. I stopped at a diner on the edge of town, the kind with flickering neon and coffee that smelled like burnt hope. The waitress, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and a name tag that said Marlene, poured me a cup without asking. "You look like someone who just saw a ghost," she said. "Something like that," I murmured. "Ghosts are tricky," she said with a half smile. "They don't always haunt places. Sometimes they haunt people." Her words stuck with me long after I paid the bill and drove to the airport. By the next morning, I was sitting in a window seat watching clouds swallow the sky. My reflection in the glass didn't look like a teacher anymore. I looked like someone standing on the edge of something vast and irreversible. When the plane touched down at JFK, the city hit me like a current, fast, loud, alive. Taxi horns, flashing billboards, people rushing with purpose. Everyone here looked like they knew where they were going. I wasn't sure I did. Grant's office was in Midtown Manhattan on the top floor of a tower, so sleek it looked like it had been carved from mirrors. The receptionist barely looked up when I said my name. "He's expecting you, Miss Harrison. Take the private elevator to 37. Expecting me." The elevator doors opened to a space that looked more like an art gallery than an office. White walls, glass partitions, and a panoramic view of the skyline. A tall man stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back. He turned when he heard me. "Grace Harrison," he said. His voice was calm, deep, deliberate. "I was wondering how long it would take you to find me. You knew I'd come." He smiled slightly. "Your grandfather made sure of it." He gestured toward a leather chair. "Please sit." I hesitated. Who are you to him? I was his partner. Silent by choice. We built things together, businesses, trusts, networks that no one in your family ever knew existed. My pulse quickened. Why hide them? Because Harold believed the world didn't need another rich family. It needed honest ones. He opened a folder on his desk and slid a stack of documents toward me. Integrity Holdings, I read aloud. "That's what this is all about." Grant nodded. "Your grandfather moved a substantial portion of his fortune into a series of blind trusts 20 years ago. He did it under your name when you were 16. I stared at him. "That's impossible." He leaned forward. "Your signature wasn't required. He was the settler. Everything's legal." I picked up one of the pages. It was a bank statement. Swiss accounts, Monaco Holdings, London, real estate numbers so large they didn't seem real. "I don't understand," I said finally. "Why me?" Grant's expression softened. "Because you were the only one who listened. He told me about you, the summers you spent helping him with reports, the way you saw patterns others ignored. He said you were the only one who understood what the word value really meant." I felt tears sting my eyes. "He never said any of that to me." "He didn't need to," Grant said. "He showed you through lessons, not words. Every conversation you thought was about chess or ethics or patience, that was training." He stood and walked to a cabinet, retrieving a black binder. "This is the master file. Every asset your grandfather concealed is listed here. But before I hand it over, you need to answer one question." I looked up. "What question? What will you do with it?" The room went quiet. Outside, the city pulsed like a living thing. "I don't know yet," I said truthfully. "But I know what I won't do. I won't sell it. I won't let my family destroy it again." Grant studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Good. That's what he hoped you'd say." He handed me the binder. "Everything in here is yours legally and ethically. But there's one final step. Harold left a final directive, a document that can only be activated at the cabin site. It's tied to the deed itself." I frowned. "Activated." He smiled faintly. "Your grandfather was a man of riddles. Think of it as his version of a key." The weight of the binder felt immense in my hands, more than money, more than proof. It was responsibility. I stood trying to steady my breath. "So what happens now?" Grant looked out at the skyline. "Now you decide whether to protect what he built or let them claim it as theirs. Either way, they'll come for you." That night, I stayed in a hotel overlooking Central Park. The binder sat on the bed unopened. I ordered room service, but couldn't eat. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Grandpa's handwriting. "Trust the silence. It will guide you home." At midnight, I opened the first page. Each section was labeled Property Holdings Partners and finally Beneficiaries. Under my name, it listed the Harrison family as contingent heirs, pending moral evaluation. Moral evaluation. My grandfather had built an empire around ethics. He'd left me not only control, but the power to decide who deserved redemption. The next morning, I booked a flight back to Oregon. I had no idea what activation meant, but I knew it started at that cabin. When I arrived, the forest was still dripping from yesterday's rain. The air smelled cleaner than it ever had. I carried the binder inside, setting it on the table where I'd first opened his letter. The chestnut still sat by the fireplace, its silver glint catching the light. I traced its outline with my fingers. The night will lead her when the board resets. Something clicked in my mind. The blueprint. I pulled it from my bag, unfolding it across the table. The cross marked near the fireplace wasn't a symbol, it was a direction. A coordinate. The floorboards beneath the hearth had a seam that wasn't quite straight. I grabbed the small brass key from my pocket and pressed it into the groove. A faint click sounded and one of the boards lifted. Beneath it lay a steel box, its surface engraved with the Harrison crest. Inside was a sealed envelope addressed to Executor of Integrity Trust. My name was listed below in smaller print. My hands trembled as I opened it. Grace, if you're reading this, you found the truth. Integrity Holdings is yours now, but it will mean nothing until you decide what justice looks like. You'll face those who mocked you, and they'll try to take back what they never earned. Let them come. This isn't about revenge. It's about restoration. One more thing, go to Alexander. Tell him to show you the ledger. You'll know what to do when you see it. Grandpa, the letter slipped from my fingers. The ledger. There was still another layer to all this. The room seemed to breathe around me. The cabin wasn't just shelter. It was a vault, a puzzle, a story still unfolding. For the first time, I understood that my inheritance wasn't about wealth or revenge. It was about rebuilding something honest from the ashes of arrogance. I looked toward the chestnut again and whispered, "All right, Grandpa, your move." Outside, thunder rolled across the hills, low and distant like an answer. And just like that, I knew the game had only just begun. The night rain hadn't stopped when I drove back from the courthouse headlights, cutting through mist that seemed alive. My mind replayed every word from that hearing, every skeptical look from the clerks, every quiet promise from Mr. Hanley that things were moving forward. The road back to the cabin twisted like a serpent through the forest, and when I pulled into the clearing, the porch light flickered, though I hadn't turned it on. I stepped out slowly, heart racing. The cabin looked different in the storm, less like a refuge and more like a secret being guarded. When I reached the steps, I noticed muddy footprints leading to the door. Fresh ones. I pushed it open. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of damp wood and smoke. The chair I'd left by the fireplace had been moved, and a small scrap of paper lay on the floor. It was soaked, the ink bleeding, but I could still read 4 words. Stop digging for ghosts. The words sent a chill through me. Someone had been inside. By the time dawn broke, I'd packed a bag and headed into town. Mr. Hanley met me at a diner near the courthouse, his suit slightly wrinkled, eyes alert as always. "They know," I said quietly, sliding the wet note across the table. He read it, jaw tightening. "That didn't take long. Your father's team must have caught wind of your filing. They'll try to freeze the executor petition before it clears." I took a sip of coffee that tasted like ash. "Can they stop it?" "Only if they can discredit the documents," he said. "But your grandfather's signature, the Swiss banking certifications, the addendum, they're solid. The key is getting it verified before Richard manipulates the narrative." "Then let's move faster," I said. Hanley smiled faintly. "Now you sound like him." We spent the morning filing a formal motion to recognize the executor of truth, a clause buried in my grandfather's trust that granted me authority to investigate and restore any assets hidden or misused within the Harrison estate. It wasn't money, it was power, legal, documented, real. In the courthouse, the marble floors echoed with every step I took. Across the hall, 2 men in black suits waited outside the clerk's office. I recognized one of them, Lowell, my father's lawyer. He smiled when he saw me. "Miss Harrison," he said smoothly, "you're causing quite a stir. Must be exhausting chasing old ghosts." "Not nearly as exhausting as covering them up," I replied. He chuckled, but there was something sharp in his eyes. You don't understand how deep this goes. Walk away while you still can. I think I'll stay, I said, pushing past him. Inside, the clerk accepted our documents, stamped them, and slid a copy back across the counter. Filed and pending review, she said. Hanley exhaled softly beside me. It's in motion. Outside, Lowell stood watching us from the steps, umbrella in hand. He didn't speak, just stared, the faint smile gone now. I could feel the threat in his silence. We drove out of the city as clouds gathered again. Hanley opened his laptop in the passenger seat. We should review the USB drive you found in the safe. If the data matches the signatures in the addendum, it could prove Harold retained controlling shares of the entire company until his death. And if it doesn't, I asked, then we build a new case. Truth always leaves fingerprints. At a rest stop just outside town, we parked under a canopy of dripping trees and powered up the laptop. The USB drive clicked softly when it connected. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a single folder appeared, Project Legacy. Hanley double-clicked it. Dozens of files filled the screen, financial statements, international transfer logs, letters of correspondence, even scanned handwritten notes. At the top was one document titled, Root Account Confidential. When we opened it, both of us froze. The file detailed a network of offshore holdings under a shell corporation, Integrity Holdings LLC, registered under my grandfather's name, and later transferred into something called the Cabin Property Trust. According to the documents, the cabin wasn't just real estate. It was a keystone asset, the legal anchor for an entire corporate empire. Whoever held the deed controlled the trust. Hanley looked at me astonished. Your grandfather hid his fortune inside plain wood and dirt. Genius. I couldn't speak. I thought about the laughter in the lawyer's office, the smug faces when I accepted the deed. They had mocked me for owning what they couldn't see. What happens now? I asked finally. Now, Hanley said, closing the laptop, we make sure no one steals it again. When I returned to the cabin that night, I found 3 new voicemail messages waiting. The first was from my mother. Grace, please stop this nonsense. You're upsetting your father. Think about the family. The second was Marcus, his voice, dripping with sarcasm. Hope you're enjoying your haunted hut. Maybe you'll find Grandpa's ghost guarding the fortune that doesn't exist. The third message chilled me. It was my father. You're playing a dangerous game, Grace. Walk away. There are things you don't understand. I deleted all 3. The forest was silent except for the chirping of crickets. I locked the doors, pulled the curtains, and sat by the fire. For the first time, I didn't feel afraid. I felt awake. The next morning, an envelope arrived by courier. Inside was an official document bearing the seal of the county court. I unfolded it with trembling hands. Pending full verification, Grace Harrison is hereby recognized as acting trustee of the Harrison legacy. The words blurred as I read them again and again. Acting trustee. It wasn't a victory yet, but it was recognition, a step into the light. I laughed softly through tears, the sound echoing in the empty cabin. Then I remembered what Grandpa had said once during a summer afternoon long ago. You can't change people, but you can change the rules of the game. Maybe that's what he'd done, change the game so that honesty would eventually win. That night, I wrote to Mr. Bennett telling him I'd uncovered the trust's first layer and thanking him for his warning. As I sealed the envelope, my eyes drifted to the old map hanging above the fireplace. I hadn't noticed before, but in the corner, faint pencil marks traced a line from the cabin to a shaded area labeled Harrison Timber Estate. Next to it, in my grandfather's tiny handwriting, were the words, Root Account. The hair on my arms rose. I stepped outside the forest, thick with the scent of pine and dew. Somewhere beyond those trees lay the next piece of his puzzle. The wind whispered through the branches, carrying the faintest echo of my grandfather's voice. Find the roots, Grace. That's where the truth grows. I turned back toward the cabin, its windows glowing in the dark. What they had dismissed as a decaying ruin was in fact the beating heart of everything my family had built and everything they'd stolen. The road to justice was still long, but tonight I finally knew which direction it led. And for the first time I was ready to follow it. The storm that had haunted Evergreen Woods finally broke that night, leaving the world washed clean and cold. I hadn't slept. The cabin felt smaller than ever, as though the walls had drawn closer with each new discovery. When the first light touched the window, I opened my laptop to check the financial database Hanley had helped me unlock. At first, everything looked normal: balances, account numbers, dates. Then red alerts started flashing across the screen. Dozens of unauthorized login attempts, all from different IP addresses. My heart sank as I scrolled further. Someone was trying to access Integrity Holdings' Swiss accounts. The system showed multiple failed entries and one partial success. My phone vibrated. "Hanley," I said, breathless. "They're already moving," he said. "Your father must have hired a private team. They're trying to cut you off from the inside. Don't log in again from that device." "They're stealing it," I whispered. "No, they're trying to make you look like you did. If they can plant digital evidence, the courts could suspend your status." "What do we do? You follow the breadcrumbs," he said. "And Grace, don't trust anyone who calls you family until we sort this out." After the call ended, I turned back to the map hanging above the fireplace. My eyes lingered on the faint handwriting root account. If there was one place my grandfather had hidden a failsafe, it was there. I packed a flashlight, a crowbar, and my grandfather's journal, then drove out before noon. The road wound deeper into the forest until it narrowed to a dirt path. When I reached the abandoned sawmill that bore the old Harrison Timber Co. sign, my stomach twisted. The building stood like a skeleton, its metal siding eaten by rust, its windows black with grime. Inside, the air was cold and stale. Fallen beams littered the floor. I followed the sound of dripping water through a corridor until I found a locked door marked office. The key from the cabin fit perfectly. Dust swirled in the beam of my flashlight. An oak desk stood in the center of the room, covered in papers long turned to yellow. Behind it hung a photograph, the same one from the cabin wall, my grandfather and his workers smiling proudly. But in this version, something was different. In the lower corner of the frame, carved faintly into the wood, were the initials HH and a small chess knight. My pulse quickened. I pried the frame from the wall. Behind it was a metal safe built into the plaster. The small key I'd carried since the day of the will slid in easily. With a soft click, the door opened. Inside were stacks of folders, an external hard drive, and a sealed envelope. The label on it read, "For Grace when they come." My fingers trembled as I tore it open. If you're reading this, they've already turned on each other. The company is their god now. You'll need allies. Find Hanley, he's the only one who still believes in honor. But beware of Marcus. He's his father's mirror. He'll smile before he strikes. I closed my eyes, remembering the day Marcus had come to the cabin pretending to be concerned. He had been the spy all along. The next few pages of the letter described a series of accounts tied to a project called Evergreen Fund, all hidden beneath shell corporations. If my father or Marcus tried to liquidate assets, the trail would lead straight to them. It wasn't just evidence, it was a trap my grandfather had set decades ago. I left the mill with the hard drive and letter tucked safely into my bag. The rain had started again, steady and cold. By the time I reached the cabin, dusk had settled. The moment I opened the door, I knew something was wrong. The air felt disturbed. The curtains fluttered, though no window was open. My laptop screen glowed on the table. Someone had turned it on. I rushed forward and froze. The security camera footage was playing. Marcus stood in the middle of the room. He had been here while I was gone. The video showed him rifling through my files, copying something onto a flash drive, then glancing at the camera with a smirk before leaving. My stomach dropped. I grabbed my phone and called him. He answered on the second ring. Well, he said. "Didn't take you long. You broke into my home. It's not your home, Grace. It's family property, and everything you're meddling with belongs to Dad." "You mean everything you stole from him?" I shot back. He laughed. "You really think this is about morality? You've been out of your depth since the will reading. Do yourself a favor and stop playing detective before you drown." "Too late," I said. "I already know what you did with Harrison Timber." His tone hardened. "You don't know anything. I know about the Evergreen Fund." Silence. "Then you shouldn't have found that." The call ended abruptly. That night, as I sat by the fire, headlights flashed through the window. A black SUV idled at the edge of the clearing, engine humming. I killed the lights and watched from the shadows. The vehicle stayed there for several minutes before finally backing away into the trees. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The next morning, I met Hanley downtown. He looked exhausted. "You were right," he said, sliding a printed report across the table. "Your brother accessed the trust servers using a cloned authorization key. We traced it back to his office computer. Can we prove it? Not yet. But we can corner him." He explained his plan. We'd issue a formal notice to the court demanding a full forensic audit of Harrison Aviation and its subsidiaries. If Marcus or Richard resisted, it would look like guilt. I nodded. "Do it." "Are you sure this will burn every bridge left in your family?" "They set the fire first," I said. That evening, I drove to the company headquarters downtown. Marcus's car was parked outside, gleaming beneath the streetlights. I walked through the lobby, ignoring the receptionist's hesitant greeting, and went straight to his office. He looked up from behind a glass desk, perfectly composed. "Grace," he said smoothly, "to what do I owe the pleasure you were in my cabin?" I said. He leaned back, folding his hands. "I don't know what you're talking about. Don't lie to me." I threw the printed security photo onto his desk. "You copied my files." He glanced at the image, then smiled faintly. "I was checking on the property." "You should thank me for making sure no one else breaks in." "Save the sarcasm," I snapped. "I know about the Evergreen Fund, about the fake transfers, about how you and Dad moved company assets before Grandpa's death." His expression finally cracked. "You have no idea what's at stake." "I have enough to end this," I said. He stood abruptly, slamming his hands on the desk. "You'll regret this, Grace. You think you're saving the family, you're destroying it." "No," I said quietly. "You destroyed it years ago." The silence between us was heavier than any argument. When I turned to leave, his voice followed me. "You're not ready for what comes next." Outside, I exhaled shakily. My hands trembled, but I felt something new beneath the fear clarity. Hanley called later that night. "The audit notice is live. The court will notify all parties by morning." "Then it's done," I said. "Not quite. Once your father finds out, he'll go after the trust directly. I'll be ready." After we hung up, I stood by the window of the cabin, watching the forest breathe in the dark. The trees swayed, gently whispering secrets older than any of us. Somewhere out there, headlights flickered again, but this time I didn't hide. "Come and see what you've built," I murmured. "Let's see how strong your empire really is." The wind howled, carrying my words into the night. And though I was alone, I no longer felt small. For the first time since Grandpa's funeral, I wasn't reacting. I was planning. And the game had just turned in my favor. The jet descended through a thin layer of clouds, revealing the glittering skyline of New York. My hands tightened around the envelope Hanley had given me, stamped with the name Alexander Grant. He was my grandfather's hidden ally, the man who supposedly knew everything about the trust that had upended my family's life. The car waiting at the airport was sleek and black, with a driver who greeted me by name. "Mr. Grant is expecting you, Miss Harrison," he said, his accent faintly British. The city moved outside my window in flashes of steel and glass, everything cold, polished, powerful. It felt like the opposite of the cabin, yet somehow just as haunted. When the elevator doors opened on the top floor of Grant Industries, a tall man in his 60s stood waiting. His posture was straight, his suit perfectly cut, his gaze sharp enough to slice glass. "Grace Harrison," he said with a small smile. "You look just like Harold did when he realized control was the real inheritance." I hesitated. You knew him well better than most, he said, motioning for me to follow him into an office with floor-to-ceiling windows. Harold trusted me because I never wanted his money, only his mind. He gestured to a large portfolio on the table. Your grandfather built 3 companies, but only one mattered: Monarch Trust Holdings. The others were just smoke. The cabin you inherited isn't property. It's registration ground, the legal anchor of every share and holding Harold ever created. Whoever owns that deed owns everything. I sank into a leather chair. You mean the cabin is the center of the empire? Grant nodded slowly. Exactly. He buried his fortune under the illusion of failure. When your father took over Harrison Aviation, Harold withdrew the heart of it, the control stock, and hid it in plain sight. He handed me a set of documents. The company structure sprawled across the pages like a web, dozens of subsidiaries, shell corporations, and international investments, all looping back to one phrase: Cabin Property Trust. It's brilliant, he said. Your family mocked you for taking that deed. They never realized the girl they laughed at walked out with the keys to the kingdom. The room spun a little. All those humiliations, the laughter, the pity, it had all been for this. My grandfather hadn't overlooked me. He'd chosen me. But there's more, Grant continued. Someone's been trying to liquidate assets tied to the trust. Large sums have already moved through offshore accounts under the name Harrison Global Ventures. Sound familiar? I swallowed hard. My father's holding company. He looked grim. Then this isn't just a race for money, Grace. It's a war for control. Before I could respond, his assistant burst into the office holding a phone. Sir, you need to see this. She turned the screen toward him. I caught a glimpse of an email chain, Marcus's name in the sender line, wire transfers attached. Grant frowned. Your brother is moving funds through a casino account in Nevada Belmont Grand. He's cashing out. I leaned forward. Can we stop it? Grant met my gaze. Only if we activate your full trustee rights. That means going back to the cabin and triggering the final clause Harold built into the trust. There's an activation code hidden there, something that proves lineage and intent. Once entered, control shifts permanently to you. I exhaled shakily. What happens if I fail? Then your father consolidates everything. And you lose more than money, you lose Harold's legacy. By midnight, I was back on a plane to Oregon, exhaustion clawing at my bones. I replayed Grant's words over and over. The cabin was the fortress, and the code was its heart. When I reached Evergreen Woods, fog rolled through the trees like smoke. The air was sharp, the night unnervingly still. Inside the cabin was as I'd left it, except for one thing. A folder lay on the table unmarked. I opened it. Inside was a photograph of my grandfather standing by the fireplace, his hand resting on a carved beam. On the back he'd written, "The night protects the king." I turned toward the hearth, hammering. The carvings near the floorboards, the ones shaped like chess pieces. My fingers traced the small knight etched into the wood. Underneath, hidden by years of soot, was a sequence of letters and numbers. I grabbed my laptop and typed them into the encrypted portal Grant had given me. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the screen flickered. Integrity Holdings ownership transfer initiated. Confirm identity. A second window appeared with my grandfather's old signature. I hesitated, then signed my name below. The loading bar moved agonizingly slow. Outside, thunder rolled across the mountains. Finally, the message appeared, ownership confirmed. Primary trustee Grace Harrison. I stared at the screen, shaking. It was done. Everything he'd built, every company, every property, it all belonged to me. The phone rang. I nearly dropped it. Grace, my father's voice came through, calm but cold. You've made a mistake. I gripped the receiver. You mean the same kind of mistake you made 30 years ago? You don't understand what you've unleashed, he said. Those holdings aren't clean. There are investors, real ones, who won't take kindly to a teacher playing executive. I'm not playing, I said. Then you've doomed yourself, he hissed. You think power is a gift. It's a burden. You'll learn that the way Harold did alone. I laughed softly. You're right about one thing. I'm done being part of your family. I'm rebuilding his. There was a pause, then a bitter chuckle. You sound just like him. Let's see if you survive as long. The line went dead. I sat there, the phone still in my hand, as the weight of what had happened settled around me. For years they'd called me naive, too soft for business. But maybe softness wasn't weakness. Maybe it was the one thing they'd never understand: compassion sharpened by truth. The next morning Hanley called with news. The court has received confirmation from both the Swiss bank and the Federal Registry. You're officially recognized as the primary trustee. They can't touch it now. I let out a shaky breath. It's over then. For now, he said. But your father won't stop. He'll pivot to whatever he thinks you can't control. As we ended the call, I looked around the cabin. Sunlight streamed through the windows, touching every scarred board, every mark of time. What once looked broken now felt eternal. Later I found an old VHS tape tucked behind the bookshelf, one I hadn't noticed before. The label simply read, "For the Last Move." I slid it into the player. My grandfather appeared on the screen, sitting right where I sat now by the same fire. His voice was calm, almost tender. "If you're watching this, Grace, it means the board is reset. I built everything for them and they sold it for scraps. But I built you for truth. Don't use this power to punish. Use it to remind them what honor feels like." Tears blurred my vision. "I'll try, Grandpa," I whispered. He smiled faintly on the screen. "You already have." When the tape ended, I sat in silence for a long time, listening to the wind outside. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from an unknown number. "Congratulations, executor. Enjoy your victory. Phase 2 begins tomorrow." Attached was a photo, Las Vegas, the Belmont Grand Casino glowing under neon lights. I stared at it, pulse quickening. So this was what my brother had been hiding. The game wasn't over. It had just moved to a brighter battlefield. I shut down the lights, the cabin glowing faintly in the dawn. "You taught me patience, Grandpa," I whispered into the quiet. "But now it's time to play." The morning headlines were impossible to ignore. My face stared back at me from every business site and social feed. "The forgotten heiress takes over the Harrison empire." I hadn't asked for the attention, but now that it was here, I intended to use it. By noon, my phone was buzzing, nonstop: reporters, investors, lawyers. I ignored them all until one text appeared from a number I hadn't seen in months. "Family dinner tonight. We need to talk." "Mom." I stared at the message for a long time. It wasn't an invitation, it was a command. The drive to the Harrison mansion felt shorter than it had in years, though every mile carried a different kind of weight. When I stepped through those towering oak doors, it was as if the past had been waiting there for me. The same chandelier glowed above the marble foyer, the same air of privilege and perfection clinging to every inch. But this time I didn't feel small walking through it. Mom met me in the hallway, dressed in pearls and control. "You've made quite a spectacle," she said, her smile brittle. "So have you," I replied, glancing at the camera crew that had filmed her charity gala the night before. "Though I'd say mine is more productive." Her lips tightened. "Let's not start." The dining room smelled of money and tension. My father sat at the head of the table, Marcus to his right, their lawyer Mr. Lowell beside them. No one spoke as I took my seat. Dad broke the silence first. "You've humiliated this family, Grace. Selling our name to the media for attention." "I didn't leak anything," I said calmly. "But the truth tends to find its way out. Especially when you spend decades trying to bury it." Marcus smirked. "The truth? You mean Grandpa's little fairy tale about moral business? You wouldn't know the first thing about running a company." "Then it's a good thing I'm not asking you for lessons," I said. Lowell cleared his throat. "Miss Harrison, if I may, your sudden claim of ownership has disrupted multiple operations. It would be in everyone's best interest if you transfer executive control back to your father. A symbolic gesture of unity, if you will." I leaned back. "Unity without honesty isn't unity. It's just corruption with better lighting." Marcus slammed his glass down. You think you're better than us because Grandpa gave you his leftovers, I smiled faintly. I think I learned from the only Harrison who still had a conscience. Dad's voice dropped cold and sharp. You're playing with fire, Grace. You're turning family into enemies. Maybe I'm just seeing the enemies who are pretending to be family, I said. The air froze. I reached into my bag and placed a thick folder on the table. This, I said, sliding it toward my father, is the new ownership record. Harrison Aviation, Harrison Timber and